In the year 711, an army of Berbers and Arabs crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, with only 7,000 men, and in less than 7 years, it conquered almost the entire Iberian Peninsula. The Visigothic kingdom, which had dominated Spain for centuries, collapsed like a house of cards, and for the next 800 years, Spain would no longer be Christian, it would be Muslim. Its cities would shine brighter than Paris, London, or Rome combined. Its libraries would contain more books than all of Christian Europe put together. Its streets would smell of orange blossom and sugar, would resonate with Arabic, Hebrew, and Romance languages, and its women would walk with greater freedom than in any Christian kingdom of the time. This is not fantasy. This was Al-Andalus, the greatest experiment in coexistence in history, and also its most brutal tragedy. In 711 CE, a man named Tariq ibn Ziyad stood on the deck of a wooden ship on the coast of what is now Ceuta and looked north. Before him, barely 14 kilometers away, rose a mountain the Romans had called Calpa, and which would soon receive its eternal name, Jabal Tariq, the mountain of Tariq, Gibraltar. Tariq was not a general. He was a Berber convert to Islam, a freed former slave with light eyes and a red beard, according to some Arab chroniclers. He commanded 7,000 men, almost all of them Berbers like himself, and a few hundred Arabs. They had no siege engines or powerful fleet, only swords, spears, leather shields, camels, and absolute certainty that Allah would grant them victory or paradise. On the other side of the strait stood the Visigothic kingdom, which had been rotting from within for 2 centuries. King Roderick had seized the throne from the sons of the late Witiza through a coup that no one had forgiven. The nobles hated one another, bishops excommunicated each other, and the people starved while the powerful accumulated land, slaves, and wealth. Spain was a corpse that still breathed. Then came the spark. Legend says that Count Julian, the Visigothic governor of Ceuta, sought revenge on King Roderick for having raped or seduced his daughter Florinda, known as La Cava. Whether this is true or later propaganda, the fact remains that Julian opened the gates of North Africa to the Muslims and lent them his ships. On the 8th of May 711, Tariq landed on the beach that now bears his name, at the foot of the rock. According to the 10th century Andalusian chronicler Ibn Hayyan, when the soldiers hesitated before the impossibility of the undertaking, Tariq ordered all the ships to be burned. Black smoke rose over the bay of Algeciras, and the commander spoke with a voice that echoed among the rocks. "Brothers, the sea is behind you, and the enemy is before you. I swear by Allah you have no choice but victory or death." 8 days later, on the 28th of July, 711, the two armies met on the banks of the Guadalete River, near the lagoon of Janda. King Roderick arrived with between 25,000 and 40,000 men, according to the sources, many of them nobles in golden armor, with horses dressed in silk. Tariq ibn Ziyad had less than half that number. The battle lasted 8 days. The first day was an even bloodbath, but on the morning of the 8th, the Visigothic flanks, commanded by the brothers and nephews of Witiza, abandoned the battlefield. Betrayal or prior pact, no one will ever know for certain. The Visigothic center collapsed like a broken dam. King Roderick disappeared. Some say he died, drowned while trying to cross the Guadalete River in his golden armor. Others claim he fled disguised as a beggar and ended his days as a hermit in Portugal. His emerald crown and his white horse, Aurelia, fell into Muslim hands. In less than a year, Toledo, the Visigothic capital, fell almost without resistance. The Jewish inhabitants of the city, persecuted for generations, opened their gates to the conquerors and took revenge on their former masters. Córdoba surrendered after a short siege. Seville, Mérida, Zaragoza, one by one the great Visigothic cities raised the green banner of Islam. The pace was so astonishing that even Arab chroniclers compared it to lightning. In only 3 years, from 711 to 714, 80% of the peninsula was under Muslim control. Only the mountainous north remained, too poor and too harsh, in the hands of small Christian groups that no one bothered to pursue. In 718, only 7 years after Tariq's landing, the last Visigothic stronghold fell. It is important to note that Septimania, on the other side of the Pyrenees, also fell into Muslim hands. An Andalusian army crossed the Pyrenees and captured Narbonne. For a brief moment, Islam came dangerously close to the Frankish kingdom. Then a Frankish nobleman named Odo of Aquitaine stopped the Muslims at the Battle of Toulouse in 721. For the first time, someone said enough, but that is another story. What matters is that in just 7 years, a peninsula that had been Christian and Roman for 8 centuries had become Muslim and Arab. And no one, neither conquerors nor conquered, could imagine that the lightning strike which had split Spain in two would continue to shine for another 800 years. The curtain had risen, Al-Andalus had just been born. In 718, Al-Andalus was a distant province of the vast Umayyad Caliphate, which stretched from the borders of India to the Atlantic. Córdoba, its capital, still smelled of a Visigothic church turned into a mosque, and its streets echoed with commands shouted in Arabic by soldiers who did not understand a single word of Latin. For 38 years, Al-Andalus was neither a kingdom nor an independent emirate. It was simply a military expedition, a hot frontier of the empire. Governors were appointed and dismissed from Damascus like pins moved on a map. 20 governors replaced one another in less than 4 decades. Some ruled for months, others for weeks. They arrived with their entourages of Syrians and Yemenis, plundered whatever they could, clashed with the Berbers who had conquered the land, and with the Muladies who already lived there, felt entitled to everything, and were eventually killed, overthrown, or recalled by the Caliph. The first Wali, Al-Sa ibn Malik, attempted to restore order by moving the capital from Seville to Córdoba, strengthening the northern frontier, and launching raids even beyond the Pyrenees. He died in 721 beneath the walls of Toulouse, struck in the neck by a Frankish arrow. After him came Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi, the only man who nearly changed the history of Europe. In 732 he crossed the Pyrenees with an army of Arabs and Berbers and advanced as far as Poitiers. There, between Tours and Poitiers, they clashed with Charles Martel and his Franks. The battle lasted 2 days. In the end, the Muslims withdrew south of the Pyrenees. Christian chroniclers called Charles the Hammer and claimed he had saved the Christian world. Arab chroniclers barely mentioned the campaign. To them, it was just another failed raid. But the real problem was not in the north, it was within. The Berbers, who had led the conquest, felt betrayed. They had been given the poorest and driest lands in the north and west, while the Arabs kept the fertile plains of the Guadalquivir and the Ebro. In 740, the Great Berber Revolt erupted. From the Duero to the Maghreb, tens of thousands of Berbers rose up, killing their Arab governors and proclaiming a rival caliphate. Córdoba was besieged. The governors were forced to take refuge in the fortress. For the first time since Tariq landed on the shore, Islam nearly lost everything. Caliph Hisham sent an elite Syrian army from Damascus under the command of Balj ibn Bishr and Kulthum ibn Iyad. Between 742 and 743, they crushed the revolt in battles so bloody that, according to a 10th century Andalusian chronicler, rivers ran red for entire leagues. Thousands were crucified along the roads. 40,000 more were forcibly deported to North Africa. The punishment was so brutal that Al-Andalus was nearly stripped of livestock in its central regions. Many of those who survived later became the Mozarabs of the north or joined the Christians of the mountains. Then came the year 749. In Damascus, a new dynasty rose to power. The Abbasids massacred the Umayyads at the infamous Banquet of Blood. Only one 19-year-old prince managed to escape. Abd al-Rahman ibn Muawiyah, grandson of Caliph Hisham, crossed North Africa pursued by Abbasid assassins. He lost his younger brother, beheaded on a Tunisian beach, and arrived in Al-Andalus in 755 with nothing but his sword and his lineage. The Abbasid governors appointed from Damascus had already replaced one another several times. The brutal Yusuf al-Fihri and his son ruled as if Al-Andalus were their personal fiefdom. But the Andalusians were weary of foreigners arriving only to enrich themselves and leave. When a living Umayyad appeared, the last of the dynasty that had ruled the Muslim world for 90 years, many saw him as salvation. In May 756, on the outskirts of Córdoba, at a place called Al-Musara, the armies of Yusuf al-Fihri and Abd al-Rahman clashed. Yusuf had more men. Abd al-Rahman had the better cause. The battle was short. Abd al-Rahman's clients and allies, many of them former Syrian soldiers who had remained in Al-Andalus, broke through the enemy lines. Yusuf fled toward Toledo and then north, where years later he would be killed by his own followers. On the 31st of May, 756, Abd al-Rahman entered Córdoba riding a white horse and dressed in green, the color of the Umayyads. He did not proclaim himself caliph. That would have been too audacious. He declared himself simply emir, an independent prince. Al-Andalus ceased to be a province of Damascus. It became an independent state, ruled by the only dynasty to survive the massacre. For 38 years, the dependent emirate had been a chaotic mixture of corrupt governors, violent rebellions, and failed raids, but it had also planted the seed of something far greater. In mosques, markets, and in the hearts of the Andalusians, people spoke of the Umayyad prince who had crossed the desert to restore lost dignity. The stage was set. The falcon of Quraysh was preparing to take flight. Córdoba, spring of 756. A young man of 25 years, tall, red-haired, with a scar on his left cheek and the gaze of someone who had seen his entire family die, crossed the threshold of the ancient Visigothic Alcazar. He wore a dark green robe, a color forbidden to all except the descendants of the Prophet. His name was Abd al-Rahman ibn Muawiyah ibn Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik, and he was a living Umayyad. 5 years earlier, he had been a prince in exile, sleeping in caves in the Moroccan Atlas Mountains, hunted by Abbasid agents who offered 100 gold dinars for his head. Now he was the ruler of Al-Andalus, yet nothing had been given to him freely. During the first 10 years of his reign, Abd al-Rahman did not know a single day of peace. In the south, the Yemenis rose, descendants of the ancient Arab conquerors who had hated the Umayyads since the days of Damascus. In the north, people still resented the massacre of 743 and refused to pay taxes. In Toledo, the Banu Qasa Muladies proclaimed their independence. In the Ebro Valley, the sons of the last Visigothic leader, Yusuf al-Fihri, were still alive and plotting. Then, in 777, came the most unexpected move. Charlemagne, king of the Franks, offered Abd al-Rahman an alliance to jointly attack the Abbasids. Abd al-Rahman refused. He knew the Frank was no one's friend, and that once he entered the peninsula, he would never leave. He preferred to continue alone. One by one, he crushed every rebellion. The most difficult was that of the southern Yemenis in 779. After defeating them in the Battle of the Civilian Vega, Abd al-Rahman ordered something that froze the blood of all Al-Andalus. He had their leaders crucified along the Guadalquivir and sent their heads to Mecca and Medina, impaled on spears, so that the Abbasids would see what awaited them if they ever set foot on his land. In Toledo, the Banu Amras shut themselves inside the city for months. When they finally surrendered, Abd al-Rahman entered, pardoned the population, and ordered the walls destroyed so that no one would ever again dare to challenge him from there. In the north, the Berber clans of the frontier were subdued through a mixture of force and cunning. Abd al-Rahman offered them better lands in the Duero Valley in exchange for service as frontier troops against the Christians of Asturias. Thus was born the Marca Superior, the first permanent defensive line against the north. But Abd al-Rahman was not only a warrior. He was a poet, an urban planner, and above all a survivor who understood that power is built on fear and beauty. In Córdoba, still a city of mud and Visigothic ruins, he ordered the construction of the first great mosque upon the old Basilica of St. Vincent. This was not an ordinary mosque, it was a declaration. Here begins a new Damascus. He brought Syrian architects, mosaics from Constantinople, and cedars from Lebanon. When the Christians of the city complained that their church was being taken from them, Abd al-Rahman paid them double its value and allowed them to build new churches outside the walls. He wanted internal peace so that he could wage war abroad. He also created the first urban police forces in Western Europe, the Sahib al-Medina and the Sahib al-Suq, who patrolled markets and streets with wooden batons and the authority to cut off the hands of thieves. Córdoba ceased to be a dangerous city and began to become an orderly one. Most importantly, he founded a dynasty. In 788, after 32 years of rule, Abd al-Rahman died peacefully in his palace in Córdoba at the age of 57. It is said that his final words at last revealed exhaustion. "How many enemies did I have to kill to be able to sleep even one night in peace?" He was succeeded by his son Hisham, a pious and strict man who continued his father's work. But the true legacy of Abd al-Rahman I was neither military nor architectural. it was something far greater. For the first time in history, Al-Andalus ceased to be a colony, a frontier or war booty. It became a state with its own name, its own dynasty, and the ambition to endure for 1,000 years. When Abd al-Rahman first arrived, he was a penniless fugitive. When he died, he left behind a unified realm, a capital of works and learning, and a lineage that would rule Al-Andalus for nearly 3 more centuries. Poets called him the Falcon of Quraysh. He entered Al-Andalus as a stranger and departed as its absolute master. And in the gardens of Córdoba, where he himself planted the first palm brought from Syria, its descendant is still preserved in the courtyard of the orange trees. The story of the Falcon of Quraysh, who flew from the ruins of Damascus to the heart of the West and settled there. For the emirate was no longer dependent, it was Umayyad, and what would come next would shake the world. Córdoba, 850. A traveler arriving from the Christian north, after crossing mountains amid frost and muddy villages, would suddenly encounter a city as if born from an oriental dream. 300,000 people lived within its walls, 5 times the population of Paris and 10 times that of London. 300,000 houses, 70,000 shops, 16 mosques, 300,000 oil lamps illuminating the streets each night. The streets were patrolled every night, and public latrines existed even in the poorest neighborhoods. The Guadalquivir River was covered with barges carrying marble from Almeria, silver from Jaén, wheat from Seville, and fair-haired slaves from the markets of Verdun. For 140 years, from Hisham I to Abd al-Rahman II, the Umayyad Emirate experienced its most brilliant and most contradictory period, cultured and cruel, tolerant and fanatical, refined and barbaric at the same time. Hisham I, who ruled from 788 to 796, was an emir of strict piety. He banned music and wine at court, but allowed Jews and Christians to build synagogues and churches. He died of a stroke while praying and left the throne to his son Al-Hakam I. Al-Hakam I, who ruled from 796 to 822, was the complete opposite of his predecessor, a drunkard and a lover of poets and Slavic eunuchs, a collector of books and severed heads. According to exaggerated chroniclers, there were more than 6,000 women and boys in his harem. And when Córdoba rebelled against his taxes in 818, in the famous revolt of the Rabad, Al-Hakam ordered something that no one would ever forget. 3 days of looting, 300 crosses along the riverbank, and 22,000 Cordobans deported to Alexandria and Crete. From then on he was called Al-Rabadi, the one from the Rabad district. Yet he was also the first great patron of Andalusian culture. He founded the first public library in Western Europe. He bought books in Baghdad and Cairo, and brought the finest musicians from Medina and Damascus. The poetic genre of the Mawasha was born at his court, the first romantic poetry written in Arabic letters, and the Zajal, sung in taverns by women who did not wear veils. Then came Abd al-Rahman II, who ruled from 822 to 852, the most elegant emir in history. He dressed in red silk, perfumed himself with musk and amber, and loved music more than any other ruler. His palace in Medinat al-Zahra had not yet been built, but he already dreamed of it. He brought from Medina a singer named Kalam, whose voice was said to make even camels weep. According to the poet Ibn Abd Rabah, Abd al-Rahman II introduced the fashion of weeping for camels into Al-Andalus. Slavic eunuchs, known as the Sakaliba, fair-haired youths bought in Verdun and castrated in Al-Andalus, served in the palace. Some rose to become generals and viziers. The most famous was Muhammad ibn Abd al-Karim al-Iklimi, who eventually governed the frontier of Zaragoza. But this was also the era of the voluntary martyrs of Córdoba. Between 850 and 859, 48 Christians, mostly children of mixed marriages, entered the mosque to publicly insult the Prophet. They wanted to die as martyrs, having watched their brothers convert to Islam out of fashion or personal interest. Muslim judges tried to declare them insane in order to save their lives, but they persisted. One by one they were beheaded. Emir Muhammad I, grandson of the previous ruler, closed newly built churches and banned public executions so that the scandal would not be repeated. Meanwhile, in the north, the Christians began to organize. In 844, an Asturian noble named Ramiro I defeated a Cordoban army at Clavillo, a battle probably invented later, but one that became legendary. In 859, Ordoño I of Asturias captured Leon and began the resettlement of the Duero region. Córdoba responded with acifas. Every summer, an army marched north to burn crops and villages, no longer conquering territory, but merely punishing. In 886, a 17-year-old boy ascended the throne. His reign lasted only 2 years. He was poisoned by his brother, Abd Allah, who ruled from 888 to 912 amid total chaos. This was the era of the great rebels. Umar ibn Hafsun, a Muladi of Visigothic origin, rose in Bobastro in Malaga and seized control of half of southern Al-Andalus. He converted to Christianity. He allied himself with the Abbasids and even with the Fatimids of Ifriqiya. Abd Allah was forced to negotiate with him 3 times. When Ibn Hafsun died in 918, his son brought his body to Córdoba to have it buried as a Muslim, thus saving the family. In Seville, the Banu Hayj proclaimed themselves independent. In Toledo, the Muladies resisted for 30 years. In the Ebro Valley, the Banu Qasa even minted their own coins bearing the name of Muhammad. Al-Andalus seemed on the verge of disintegration. Then, in 912, a 21-year-old young man rose to power, one who had grown up watching his grandfather and father humiliated by rebels. His name was Abd al-Rahman ibn Muhammad, and he would become known as Abd al-Rahman III, al-Nasir li-Din Allah, the one who makes God's religion victorious. During the first 16 years of his reign, he crushed every rebellion one by one. Ibn Hafsun's stronghold at Bobastro was finally defeated in 928. When Abd al-Rahman entered the fortress, he found the rebels' embalmed body still seated on its throne, dressed as a Christian monk. He ordered it beheaded and the head sent to Córdoba in a cage. And in 929, when not a single enemy remained within his borders, Abd al-Rahman made the decision that would change history forever. He proclaimed himself caliph. He was no longer a mere emir, independent of all others. He was the successor of the Prophet. Just like the Abbasid in Baghdad and the Fatimid in Ifriqiya, Córdoba ceased to be merely an important city. It became the capital of a caliphate. The golden age of the emirate had ended. The golden age of the caliphate had just begun. The year was 929. Córdoba awoke wrapped in a silver mist that the rising sun slowly dissolved above the Guadalquivir River. From the tower of the great mosque, the muezzin called to prayer, and his voice echoed through streets already boiling with life. Syrian merchants unloaded rolls of silk. Circassian slaves watered courtyards with copper pitchers. A rabbi debated with a Muslim jurist beneath the shade of an orange tree, while blue-eyed Slavic eunuchs walked by escorting a favorite of the caliph. At the center of all this, in the throne hall of the Alcazar, a 40-year-old man stood up. He had fair skin, green eyes, and a beard dyed with henna. He wore a black tunic embroidered in gold with verses from the Quran. His name was Abd al-Rahman ibn Muhammad ibn Abd Allah, and he had just proclaimed himself caliph. Heralds roamed the streets crying out, "Allah has granted victory to his servant al-Nasir li-Din Allah, commander of the faithful." From that day on, Córdoba ceased to be merely a city. It became a legend. Over the next 80 years, from 929 to 1008, Al-Andalus experienced its most prosperous, dazzling, and fragile period. Abd al-Rahman III, al-Nasir, ruled for 50 years. In those 5 decades, he did not lose a single major battle. He reconquered Toledo in 932, Zaragoza in 937, and forced the Christian kings to pay parias, tributes in gold and slaves. When Ramiro II of Leon refused to pay, Al-Nasir marched north with an army so vast that, according to the chroniclers, the spears looked like a moving forest. At Simancas, in 939, the Christians achieved a Pyrrhic victory. But the caliph returned the following year, and devastated everything as far as Santiago de Compostela. There he ordered the bells of the cathedral to be carried on the backs of captured Christians to Córdoba, to be hung as lamps in the mosque. Yet Al-Nasir's true obsession was not war but beauty. 6 kilometers from Córdoba, he ordered the construction of Medinat al-Zahra, the radiant city. 3,000 workers labored for 10 years, raising 10,000 columns of pink marble from Almeria, green marble from Greece, and black marble from Africa. Mercury fountains reflected light like liquid mirrors. One hall had a ceiling of solid gold and silver, with a pearl the size of a dove's egg hanging at its center, a gift from the Byzantine emperor. When the envoy of Emperor Otto I of the Holy Roman Empire arrived in 956, it is said he fell to his knees and wept upon seeing the city, for nothing in Europe compared to it. Córdoba may once have reached a population of 1 million, a figure debated yet accepted by many modern historians. 700 mosques, 300 public baths, 100,000 oil lamps lighting the streets each night. An aqueduct bringing water from mountains 30 kilometers away, and books. The Caliphal Library held 400,000 volumes at a time when the Abbey of St. Gall, the largest Christian library in Europe, possessed only 600 books. Its catalog alone filled 44 volumes. Women copyists were employed and paid as state officials. A Christian traveler wrote, "In Córdoba, even the shoemakers argue about Arabic grammar." When Al-Nasir died in 961, he left behind a realm at peace, a full treasury, and a son prepared to rule. That son was Al-Hakam II, the great bibliophile, who ruled from 961 to 976. He never left Córdoba in his entire life. He spent his days reading and acquiring books, sending agents as far as Baghdad, Cairo, and Samarkand. It is said that when a new book arrived, he would suspend audiences to read it. Yet he was also a stern ruler. When the Fatimids of Ifriqiya attempted to invade the Maghreb, he sent a fleet that crushed them, and when the Normans sailed along the Atlantic and raided the coasts in 966, he pursued them until none remained alive. Al-Hakam died without a legitimate adult male heir. His favorite concubine, a Basque woman named Sub, had given him 2 sons. The eldest, Hisham, was only 11 years old. And then appeared the man who would change everything. Muhammad ibn Abi Amir was poor, handsome, ambitious, and ruthless. A student at the University of Córdoba, he became the lover of Sub, the mother of the future caliph, and within a few years rose from scribe to treasurer, then to general, and finally to hajib, the equivalent of a prime minister. Everyone called him Al-Mansur Billah, the one made victorious by God, and victorious he was. In 50 military campaigns, Al-Mansur devastated the Christian kingdoms of the north. He captured Barcelona in 985, destroyed Leon, ravaged Coimbra, and in 997 he marched once again to Santiago de Compostela. This time he did not settle for carrying off the bells. He destroyed the cathedral entirely, and forced Christian captives to rebuild it stone by stone in Córdoba as a trophy. Christian kings called him the Scourge of God. Muslims called him Sa'id, meaning Lord. He built for himself a new palace city, Medinat al-Zahira, meant to eclipse Medinat al-Zahra. But Al-Mansur died in the year 1000, either on the battlefield of Calatayud or of illness in Medina Chile, according to differing accounts. He was buried with dust from all his campaigns sewn into the pocket of his robe. With him died the last great golden age of the caliphate. His son Abd al-Malik continued his work for a few years, but it was already too late. The army was filled with Berber mercenaries who hated the Andalusi population. The Slavic palace slaves plotted. The legitimate Umayyad heirs waited for their moment. 6 years after Al-Mansur's death, Córdoba rose against his grandson. For 3 days the crowds looted Medinat al-Zahra. The pearls of the throne hall were trampled into the mud. The once radiant city was reduced to ruins that can still be visited today. The caliphate, jewel of the world, collapsed like a house of cards. The Golden Age had lasted exactly 80 years, and the Andalusi apocalypse began. Córdoba, the year 1009. The air smelled of smoke and old blood. Streets that 10 years earlier had been lit by 100,000 lamps now lay dark and strewn with corpses. In the plaza of the Alcazar, the head of the last legitimate caliph, Hisham II, hung impaled on a pike. He was 27 years old and had been dead for 4 days. What began as a dispute over the throne became a war of all against all, one that would last 23 years and leave Al-Andalus in ruins. It began when the great clans of Córdoba, weary of the sons of Al-Mansur, rebelled. On the 23rd of February, 1009, a mob stormed the palace and dragged the young caliph Hisham II from his bed. They forced him to abdicate and installed a distant cousin in his place, Muhammad II al-Mahdi. He was the first caliph who commanded nothing. He was a puppet. The Berbers, who had been the shock troops of Al-Mansur, saw their chance and backed another Umayyad claimant. The Slavic palace slaves supported a third. The native Andalusians, old Arabs and mullads, split among all sides. In just 3 years there were 5 different caliphs, all bearing the same Umayyad name, all murdered or deposed. Muhammad II al-Mahdi lasted 2 years. He was overthrown by a man named Sulayman al-Mustain, who entered Cordoba in 1011 with 10,000 Maghrebi horsemen. For 3 days the city was mercilessly looted. Women in the palaces were raped upon the very carpets where lutes had once been played. Medinat al-Zahra, already wounded, received its death blow. It was burned alive. Even today, pieces of marble melted by the heat are found among its ruins. Sulayman ruled for 5 years. In 1015, the people of Cordoba, led by a new pretender named Abd al-Rahman IV, defeated him and beheaded him. His head was carried through the streets in an iron cage. And so it continued. Between 1009 and 1031, Al-Andalus had 12 caliphs. Most ruled for mere months, some were children, others were old men pulled from prison. One was a black slave purchased for the occasion. Palaces became slaughterhouses, eunuchs changed masters weekly. The most beautiful concubines, queens yesterday, were sold in the slave markets the next day. As Cordoba bled, the rest of the land fractured. In every major city an independent kingdom arose. The Taifas. In Zaragoza the Banu Hud of Yemeni origin proclaimed themselves kings. In Toledo the Banu Dilnan Berbers did the same. In Seville the Abbadids, pure-blooded Arabs, turned the ancient capital of the Guadalquivir into a court of poets and assassins. In Granada, the Zurids Berbers from North Africa built the Alhambra upon the Red Hill. In Badajoz, the Aftasids. In Valencia, the Emirs. In Almeria, the Sumadids. In Malaga, the Hammadids, who even proclaimed themselves caliphs, claiming Umayyad blood. In total, more than 30 taifas, great and small, rich and poor, Arab and Slavic, all hated one another. And all feared the only remaining power to the north, the Christian kingdoms. For while the Muslims slaughtered one another, the Christians advanced. Alfonso V of Leon captured Viseu. Sancho III the Great of Navarre was crowned Emperor of all Spain and held Castile. Bermudo III of Leon died in battle against the Navarrese. The Counts of Barcelona began extracting tribute from the Catalan taifas. In Cordoba, the former capital of the Caliphate, no one remained who could truly be called caliph. The last, Hisham III, was deposed in 1031. The leading citizens of the city gathered in the Great Mosque and made a historic decision. Enough of the Umayyads, enough of caliphs. Cordoba would become a republic ruled by its own citizens. It was the first and only Islamic republic in history. It lasted exactly 2 years. In 1033, the Sevillans under Al-Mu'tadid, the most ruthless and cunning of the Taifa kings, entered Cordoba, looted it one final time, and reduced it to a secondary city. The great mosque remained closed for months, the Guadalquivir filled with corpses drifting toward the sea. When the dust settled, the caliphate that had once been the wonder of the world no longer existed. In its place stood 30 small, wealthy, cultured, and weak kingdoms. Kingdoms that paid tribute to Christians to avoid attack. Kingdoms that warred with one another over villages or famous poets. Kingdoms that built palaces of dreams while their borders crumbled. Chroniclers called these years fitna, discord, the time when the Muslims of Al-Andalus lost their heads and with them the paradise they had built. In just 23 years, the most powerful state in Western Europe had destroyed itself. And in the northern mountains, an Asturian Leonese king named Alfonso VI smiled, for the Reconquista was no longer a dream, but only a matter of time. In Zaragoza, King Al-Muqtadir built the Aljaferia, a palace that even today looks like a dream made of marble and plaster. In Granada, the Zurids began building the enclosure of the Alhambra on Sabika Hill. In Almeria, the richest port in the Mediterranean, ships arrived from Alexandria, Constantinople, and Sicily, loaded with spices, slaves, and books. In Valencia, the Vizier Ibn Jahaf ruled in the name of a mad king locked in a tower, and everywhere there was poetry. Poets who were generals, viziers, beggars, or kings. Poets who fell in love with boys or princesses, who insulted one another in verses that are studied today in universities. Ibn Zaydan wrote to Walada, the Umayyad princess who kept a literary salon open to all and who embroidered verses on her tunic. I am worthy of glory from God, and I walk toward it with firm steps. They loved one another, betrayed one another, tore each other apart in poems that still bring tears to the eyes. But beneath the beauty, rot was spreading. The Taifa kings paid the Christians more gold every year so they would not attack. Alfonso VI of Leon and Castile, a harsh and perceptive man, called them my Moorish kings and collected tribute from them, which allowed him to build the Cathedral of Santiago and marry his daughters to the kings of France and England. In 1085, Alfonso VI decided that he had waited long enough. He besieged Toledo. Toledo was the ancient capital of the Visigoths, the sacred city of the Christians. King Al-Qadir, terrified, begged for help from the other Muslim kings. No one came. Seville, Zaragoza, Granada, Badajoz all looked the other way. On May 25, 1085, Toledo opened its gates. Alfonso VI rode in on a white horse and sat upon the throne of the Visigothic kings. That was the day Al-Andalus realized it was naked. Islamic scholars cried out in the mosques, "This is Allah's punishment for our sins and our divisions." Poets wept in their palaces, and Al-Mu'tamid, king of Seville, wrote one of the saddest verses in Arabic literature. "Woe to me! I have placed my neck under the yoke of the unbelievers. Out of fear of death, I exchanged glory for humiliation." At that moment, a group of Islamic scholars and notable men crossed the strait and entered Morocco. They went in search of the Almoravids, desert warriors who wore the black litham and claimed to be the pure sword of Islam. Yusuf ibn Tashfin, emir of the Almoravids, heard their pleas and replied, "I will go to save Al-Andalus, but when I arrive I will not leave. The paradise of poets has become the hell of Puritans." October 1086, the plain of Sagrajas near Badajoz. The sun had barely risen, and already more than 30,000 men faced one another. On one side stood Alfonso VI with his heavy cavalry, red crosses on their shields, bishops blessing their spears. On the other side stood a sea of black veils and war drums that echoed like distant thunder, the Almoravids. Yusuf ibn Tashfin, a 67-year-old man, thin, dark-skinned, with a white beard and eyes like burning embers, sat on the ground on a prayer mat. He wore neither crown nor silk, only a simple black turban and a coarse woolen tunic. When asked why he did not ride a horse like the other rulers, he replied, "The Prophet rode a camel, I need no more." The battle began at noon on a Friday. After the communal prayer, the Almoravids attacked in waves. First came the camel-mounted archers, then the Senegalese spearmen, naked from the waist up, finally, the heavy cavalry with faces covered by the litham. Alfonso VI lost half his army in 6 hours. He himself fled, his face covered in blood, leaving behind 5,000 dead, among them many Castilian nobles. When he reached Toledo, he claimed he had heard the Almoravids shout Allahu Akbar so many times that he thought the sky would collapse. It was the greatest Christian defeat since the Battle of Guadalete 375 years earlier. Al-Andalus breathed again. The Taifa kings sent gifts to Yusuf, gold, slaves, and Arabian horses. Al-Mu'tamid of Seville even gave him his own sword with an ivory hilt. Yusuf took it, examined it, and said, "Keep it. Soon you will need it to defend yourself from me." Because Yusuf had not come to save the poet kings, he had come to punish them. In 1090, 4 years after Sagrajes, Yusuf returned with an even larger army. One by one, the Taifas fell like ripe fruit. Granada in September 1090, Córdoba in March 1091. The Almoravids entered the Great Mosque and burned every book of philosophy and poetry they could find. Seville fell in September 1091. Al-Mu'tamid fought until the very last day. When he saw that everything was lost, he went out into the courtyard of his palace with his wife Itimad and their children, and said, "I would rather be a camel driver in Morocco than a swineherd in Castile." The Almoravids chained him and put him on a ship bound for Africa. On the galley, Itimad looked one last time at the silhouette of Seville and wept. Al-Mu'tamid carved verses into the wood of the ship with his fingernail. "O Seville, how long I ruled within you, and now I walk in chains." He died 4 years later in a village near Agmat, a prisoner, poor and blinded by tears. His verses are still recited today. Valencia held out longer. There Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, El Cid Campeador, ruled as an independent lord from 1094. After his death in 1099, his widow Jimena took over the defense of the city, supported by a Castilian garrison. The Almoravids kept up the pressure for years and finally captured Valencia in 1102. Legends claim that El Cid was made to ride Babica to inspire terror, but in reality, although his body had been embalmed, it was never used in battle. Before the fall, Jimena evacuated the city and took her husband's remains with her to the monastery of San Pedro de Cardeña. In less than 10 years, all the taifas disappeared. Al-Andalus once again became a unified state, but it was no longer a land of perfumed poets. It had become a military empire of the desert. The Almoravids forbade wine, music, and dancing in public places. They burned the books of Al-Ghazali, claiming he spoke too much about love. They forced women to wear full veils. Jews and Christians, who had previously been protected, were now subjected to heavier taxes. The Andalusians, who felt culturally superior to the Africans, mocked them in private, calling them the stinking ones and camel drivers. Yusuf ibn Tashfin died after living nearly 100 years, having spent much of his life in prayer. His sons and grandsons succeeded him, but the empire began to fracture almost immediately. In the north, the Christians recovered their strength. Alfonso I, the Battler of Aragon, captured Zaragoza in 1118. After a brutal siege, the Almoravids began to lose battle after battle. In 1144, a popular uprising in Córdoba itself proclaimed a new leader, Ibn Mardaniz, the Wolf King of Murcia, allied with the Christians. And in the Atlas Mountains, another, even more fanatical movement was watching and waiting. The Almohads, who proclaimed the absolute unity of God, led by a man who claimed to have seen the prophet in a dream. The Almoravids, who had come to save Al-Andalus, had become hated tyrants. In 1145, the last Almoravid governor of Córdoba was killed inside the mosque while praying. His head rolled down the steps of the mihrab. The desert had devoured the gardens, but the desert itself was about to be devoured by an even harsher desert. Al-Andalus was once again preparing to shed its skin. Marrakesh, 1130. A thin man with sunken eyes and a voice like distant thunder stood before the crowd gathered in front of the Kutubiyya Mosque. His name was Muhammad ibn Tumart. He wore a seamless white robe, his hair and beard reaching his chest. He raised his hand and cried out, "There is no God but God, and he has no equal." The Almoravids, he declared, had corrupted the faith. On that day was born the Almohad movement, those who proclaimed the unity, those who believed the world was rotten and that only fire could purify it. Ibn Tumart proclaimed himself the infallible guide. When asked why he allowed himself what he forbade to others, he replied, "The Mahdi is the living proof of God on earth. What he does is law." Within 12 years, the Almohads conquered the entire Maghreb. In 1147, they captured Marrakesh. The Almoravids were slaughtered without mercy. Their women were enslaved. Books of poetry, music, and philosophy were thrown onto bonfires that burned for days. The new ruler, Abd al-Mumin, was crowned Caliph of the Faithful. In 1148, he crossed the strait with an army described by chroniclers as a black cloud blotting out the sun. Al-Andalus received the Almohads with a mixture of fear and hope. The Andalusians hated the Almoravids, but they soon discovered that the new masters were worse. One by one, cities either opened their gates or were taken by force. Malaga fell in 1151, Granada in 1154, Córdoba in 1163. The Almohads entered the Great Mosque and ordered that all verses of love written on its walls be erased. Seville fell in 1172. In every square, Almohad scholars proclaimed, "Enough of flutes, wine, and perfumed boys, return to the Quran or die." Jews and Christians who refused conversion were expelled or killed. Thousands fled to the Kingdom of Castile, among them the family of Moses ben Maimon, who would later settle in Egypt and whose son would become known as Maimonides. Andalusians who resisted were punished in ways reminiscent of the darkest Roman times. In Córdoba, a group of young men were caught singing an old Muwasha by Ibn Zaydan. The Almohads crucified them upside down at the gate of the bridge. For weeks, crows feasted on their eyes. Yet in war against the Christians, the Almohads were invincible for a time. In 1195, Caliph Abu Yusuf Yaqub al-Mansur crossed the strait with an army that, according to the chronicler al-Marakushi, made the earth tremble. On July 19th, on the plain of Alarcos near Ciudad Real, he faced Alfonso VIII of Castile. The battle was a massacre. The Christians lost 15,000 men. Alfonso fled with only 300 horsemen. Al-Mansur ordered the heads of Castilian nobles to be nailed to the walls of Seville and took the title Al-Mansur, the Victorious, the same title borne by the great conqueror 2 centuries earlier. For 15 years, the Almohads seemed unstoppable. They retook Valencia, conquered the Algarve, and forced Christian kings once again to pay tribute. In Seville, they built the Giralda, a tower so tall it was said that Africa could be seen from its summit. In Marrakesh they raised the Koutoubia. In Rabat they began building a mosque that would have been the largest in the world had it ever been finished. But pride kills. Caliph al-Nasir was a weak man, surrounded by corrupt viziers. While he indulged in concubines, the Christian kingdoms united for the first time in a crusade proclaimed by Pope Innocent III. On July 16, 1212, at the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, two worlds collided. On one side stood Alfonso VIII of Castile, Pedro II of Aragon, and Sancho VII of Navarre, with 40,000 men and papal blessing. On the other side stood Caliph al-Nasir with more than 100,000 men, according to exaggerated chronicles, all crying Allahu Akbar. The battle raged all day under hellish heat. Around the caliph's tent the Almohads formed a human chain, men tied to one another with ropes so they could not retreat. When Christian cavalry broke the chain, it became a death trap. Tens of thousands died trampled by their own companions. The caliph fled, leaving behind his personal Quran, adorned with gold and pearls, which is still preserved today in El Escorial. He returned to Seville broken in spirit. It is said he never smiled again. He died a year later, drowned in his own bile, according to physicians. After Las Navas, everything collapsed. In 1223, Murcia surrendered to the Christians. In 1236, Córdoba, capital of the Caliphate for 300 years, opened its gates to Ferdinand III of Castile. The remaining Almohads were slaughtered or fled. The great mosque was turned into a cathedral. The bells once carried south by Al-Mansur returned north, borne on the shoulders of Muslim prisoners. In 1248, Seville fell. The last Almohad caliph on the peninsula, Abu Umar al-Murtada, sailed for Marrakesh with what remained of the treasury. As the galley left the harbor, an old woman on the shore cried out, "The last lion of Islam in Al-Andalus is leaving." In less than 70 years, the Almohads had arrived like a storm and departed like dust on the wind. Behind them they left ruins, burned books, and a phrase the Andalusians would repeat for centuries. First came the perfumed ones, then the hooded figures, then the fanatics, and now comes ruin. Islam had lost half the peninsula. Only the small Nasra kingdom of Granada remained, nestled among the snows of the Sierra Nevada, paying tribute and pretending it was still powerful. The end was near. Granada, 1238. A 24-year-old man with a black beard and eyes like burning embers climbs the red hill of Sabika and looks down upon the city at his feet. His name is Muhammad ibn Yusuf ibn Nasr, but people already call him Ibn al-Amar, the son of the Red One, either because of the color of his beard or because of the blood he spilled to reach this place. He had taken Granada with barely 300 horsemen after the collapse of the Almohads. The notables of the city opened the gates to him and swore loyalty. He, cunning and cautious, kissed the ground and said, "I am not a king. I am only the first among the servants of God." Thus he founded the Nasra dynasty, the last Muslim dynasty of the Iberian Peninsula. For 260 years, 23 Nasra sultans would rule a kingdom that grew smaller, more beautiful, and more doomed with every generation. The secret of their survival was simple: pay, deceive, and build beauty so no one dares destroy it. From the very first day, Muhammad I ibn al-Amar knelt before Ferdinand III of Castile and became his vassal. He surrendered Jaén, promised 100,000 maravedis a year, and sent Muslim cavalry to fight against other Muslims. In return, the Christians allowed Granada to live. And while he paid, he built. At first, the Alhambra was not a palace, it was a fortress, but his sons and grandsons transformed it into the most beautiful stone dream ever created. Courtyards filled with myrtle trees where water sings, halls of stalactites resembling an inverted sky, verses of the Quran winding across the walls like golden ivy. In the 14th century, Yusuf I ordered the inscription on the Fountain of the Lions, "Blessed be the hand that carved these columns and these lions, for within them the glory of a kingdom that still breathes is visible." For 2 centuries, Granada lived a second golden age, smaller but more intense. Merchants from Venice and Genoa arrived at the port of Malaga loaded with fabrics and spices. Converted Jews and Moriscos cultivated silk in La Vega, the most fertile plain in Europe. Poets such as Ibn al-Jatib and Ibn Zamruk wrote verses that can still be read today on the walls of the Alhambra. Musicians played in the gardens of the Generalife, while princesses danced barefoot on Damascene carpets. But every year, the kingdom shrank. In 1482, a marriage changed history. Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon united their crowns. There were no longer divisions between Castile and Aragon. There was no one left to oppose them. The Catholic monarchs looked toward Granada and said, "The time has come." On April 10, 1483, the Christian army crossed the frontier. 100,000 men, bronze cannons cast in Flanders, thousands of knights in shining armor. Granada had barely 50,000 inhabitants and 15,000 defenders. The war lasted 10 years of sieges, betrayals, and hunger. Boabdil, the last sultan, was a man trapped in a storm. He was 23 when the war began and 33 when it ended. His father Muley Hassan, his uncle El Zagal, and their allies fought for the throne while the Christians advanced. Boabdil was captured at Lucena in 1483. The Catholic monarchs released him on one condition, that he fight against his own uncle. He became a puppet king of the Christians in his own realm. One by one the cities fell. Malaga in 1487, its inhabitants sold into slavery or burned alive. Baza, Almeria, Guadix, only Granada remained. On January 2, 1492, Boabdil left the Alhambra through the Gate of the Seven Floors, accompanied by his mother Aisha, his wife Moraima, and his young son. The Catholic monarchs awaited him in the plain. With trembling hands he handed over the keys of the city. Legend says that as he climbed the mountain pass now called the Moor's Last Sigh, Boabdil turned back to look at Granada one final time and burst into tears. Beside him stood his mother Aisha, the unyielding sultana, who reproached him, "Do not weep like a woman for what you could not defend like a man." The Alhambra stood empty. The fountains continued to sing, but no one listened. The Jews were expelled. Months later, the Mudéjars, as the remaining Muslims were called, were forced to convert or go into exile in 1502. Many left for North Africa. Others stayed and became Moriscos, false Christians who hid the Quran beneath the earth. On January 2, 1492, at 11 in the morning, the banner of Castile and Aragon rose atop the watchtower. A herald cried, "Granada belongs to the Catholic monarchs, Santiago enclosed Spain." 8 centuries after Tariq burned his ships on the shores of Gibraltar, the last Muslim ship left Almeria, bound for Iran. Al-Andalus was dead. But on the walls of the Alhambra, in the verses of Ibn Zamruk, in the songs still sung in the old villages of the Alpujarra, an echo remains, one that will never fade. Everything passes, only beauty remains. Granada, 1992. 500 years after the fall, a tourist climbs the hill of Sabika and stops at the Fountain of the Lions. The water still flows in silver cascades as if time itself had stopped. A guide explains that here ruled Boabdil, the last Moorish king. But the true legacy of Al-Andalus is not in ruins, it is everywhere. 8 centuries of Islam on the peninsula cannot be erased by decree. When Boabdil handed over the keys, he did not end history, he buried it beneath the earth. In the Spanish language alone, modern Arabic survives in more than 4,000 words: mayor, oil, cotton, sugar, chess, hope, God willing. Every time we say olive or chance, we invoke the gardens of Córdoba. In architecture, the Alhambra is not an exception. It lives in the arches of the Great Mosque of Córdoba, in the courtyards of Andalusia's white villages, in the Mudéjar towers of Teruel, even in the Alcazar of Seville, turned into a Christian palace but still scented with musk and jasmine. In science, Andalusian physicians pioneered modern surgery. Astronomers in Toledo measured the heavens with instruments Copernicus would use centuries later. The philosophy of Averroes and Avicenna shaped Thomas Aquinas and the Renaissance itself. But the deepest legacy is human. The Moriscos, forced Christians who hid the Quran in basements and prayed in Arabic disguised as Latin, rose in rebellion in the Alpujarra in 1568. When they were expelled in 1609, 200,000 left for Tunis and Algeria. Others vanished into silence. Even today, in villages of the Alpujarra, families still bury amulets bearing Quranic verses. They dance the Zambra in secret. Al-Andalus was not only conquest and glory, it was the greatest experiment in coexistence. Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived together. They hated each other, they loved each other, they created together. In Córdoba, a Muslim scholar debated with a bishop while a rabbi wrote medical treatises. That broken miracle, shattered by intolerance, is what hurts the most. Today, when we look at the Strait of Gibraltar, we see more than water. We see the bridge Al-Andalus built between east and west. Palaces collapsed, books burned, kings wept, but its soul remains in April light, in the sound of fountains, in a nostalgia we feel without knowing why. 8 centuries later, Al-Andalus is not gone. It only sleeps, and on nights of the full moon above the Alhambra, one can still hear the echo of a distant lute.